that was an awesome song. That was called The Acorn. And it was by a band called the Scram Band. Sometimes you feel like that's a great word. Scram, get out of here. Wonder if that's what it was intended for. I don't know. But regardless, good song, good song. So, lots of good stuff going on in the worlds, my friends. The worlds. Interesting statement. Is that a slip up? Is there more worlds than one? Who really knows? Apparently, me and my documentaries, and all the other interesting things I watch that are going on in the world, seems like there's a lot of activity going on in the sky. Have you been following any of that? I don't know what you expose yourself to. We made a decision, probably 7 years ago, we canceled our cable. And so we really control all our programming in our home. And pros and cons to that, right? So the pros are we don't get overwhelmed by the commercials. We don't get overwhelmed by such as CNN. I think that was a big downfall for humanity, in my opinion, to have 24-hour news. I don't think that's really a good thing because that can equal 24-hour stress, especially now that we're learning about fake news, right? We're learning, did you know, for example, I thought this was pretty cool. Well, not pretty cool, but pretty cool that I heard this. That when you're watching the news quite often, and I'm not saying on any particular station, it could happen on all of them. How do I know? I don't have cable, right? But what they do quite often is they'll have a news reporter who's giving the news or his version of the news or whatever. And I don't know what you're like when you're like in your car, but I have 3 or 4 different stations that I listen to all the time. And so if I listen to the news and there's, say, a 2-minute delay, I don't do sports. A lot of times I don't pay attention to the weather either unless I'm concerned about something that's coming. So I might be driving along and I might listen to, for example, Sarnia News. So I listen to Sarnia News. I listen to it for 45 seconds because that's really the only part that really interests me. And I'm always disappointed in what they think is news and what I think is news. Nothing personal, just giving my opinion. But then I'll turn around and I'll hit the Chatham News, like the Chatham station, which I honestly listen to a lot more because I find it much more positive and uplifting, their music selection. So I'll turn around and I'll hit the Chatham channel and I'll hear exactly the same news right down to the opening line, the comments, the reactions, everything. And because I travel around to speak in different communities, I've noticed it in Sarnia. I've noticed it when I get close to London. I've noticed it in Chatham. It is like so consistent. So if you ever questioned if there is programming going on in the, let's call it above ground news, because this is internet, right? Like I'm on internet radio, so I call it below ground. I don't know why, but anyways, why do I do some of the things I do? But I just found that really interesting, and it totally validates how they're being scripted to only say certain things. But so back to what I found out. So this is pretty interesting. So you have the guy at the news desk. So it's Jim, and he's on channel 123, and he's giving a news story. And then all of a sudden it cuts over to Pam, and Pam is giving a news story. But in Pam's news story, she's talking about the effects of orange juice on your gallbladder. I don't know. I'm just throwing this totally right out there. So she's talking about orange juice and the effect on your gallbladder or something. And then all of a sudden it goes back to Jim and he carries on with the regular news. Did you realize that Jill is actually working for the orange juice company? That's really not even news. What Jill is doing is it's a commercial. But you don't realize it's a commercial because, talk about fake news, because she's sitting there at a desk in a simulated news environment, which leads you to believe that it's news, but this is an actual fact. It's paid for by, in that scenario, the orange juice company. Just like I think we're learning, quite often the studies that are being presented to us, who are they financed by? They're financed by the company that is going to profit the most from it, right? So just different ways that we need to educate ourselves. Lately, I've been watching and educating myself a lot on chemtrails. And I think it's something we need to, as a population, be very conscious of and very aware of. And if you live in a city, the bigger the city, the higher the population, the more the chemtrails. So it was just really interesting. I shared today on one of my other Facebook pages, which is called In the Know, like I-N, the T-H-E, and then know, K-N-O-W, a really interesting one. And it was actually like a council proceeding in California where they had all these people come and give witness to what they knew about chemtrails. So they had pilots, they had chemists, they had, what else did they have? Just all sorts of different, so it was the scientists, the chemists, the pilots, just giving their experiences of the aluminum in the air. They talked about some really interesting stuff. Definitely check that out. Even if you don't want to go to my Facebook page, whatever, that's fine. Check it out, look it up in YouTube. And what you're looking for, actually I should look it up here. What you're looking for is a video and it's testimony of, and it lists the pilot, like you're going to find it. And one thing that they talked about, they talked about different things that have changed, like Alzheimer's is so prevalent now, autism in children, different things. So, you're listening to that, and Common Sense Michelle says, do I really believe that? Like, I don't know, that's sort of debatable. But the one thing that really jumped out at me is they were talking about how they've tested the mountain water, and it should be 0% aluminum, but they have aluminum readings in there. So I thought, well, that is really interesting. Going a step further, and this is something that if you have access to any sort of TV knowledge, and any sort, about these forest fires that have been going on. So they've been happening in Alberta. There was a really big one. I believe it wiped out, if not all of Fort McMurray, it wiped out a big part of it within the last couple of years. People were like grabbing their belongings and running from their homes. In California, they've been having these big wildfires they can't control. And also in BC. And I have so much family all through BC. My cousin Claudel, who I've never met, she lives in northern BC. She, like by Williams Lake area, they had to evacuate their family. She was on some local news, just giving people information, collecting lists of the names of people that were okay, and they're watching their houses burn. And they were all so boggled as to what is happening, what is different, what has changed. And this is what we have to ask ourselves. When we have all these wackadoodle things that are going on in the world, you have to ask yourself, what has changed? What is different? What is different now that wasn't going on 50 years ago? And quite often I go back to, it's the food. It's something in the food. It's something that we're doing in the farming industry. It is, maybe it's the water. Is it the fluoride in the water? I only know about fluoride in the water. What don't I know about? Because, geez, I don't know everything. I'm trying, but, there's only so much you can know. And this chemtrails thing, and it really made me reflect on 3 years ago, my daughter and I, we drove across Canada. We did a free hugs thing, random acts of kindness. It was so very cool. Used the law of attraction to have it paid for. Thank you, universe. Very cool, very awesome. I'd love to talk about that another time because I'm supposed to be telling the news here. But anyways, one of the things I noticed was, and I didn't notice it until Saskatchewan because it's the flattest, most boring province in Canada, but I still loved it anyways, was as we were going through the big billowy clouds like from when we were kids. So when you were a kid, and I don't know how old you are, but when I was a kid, we used to lay on the grass. That's one of the things we would do. You'd lay on the grass and you'd look up in the sky and you'd be like, oh, I think that's an elephant. Oh, that one looks like a bunny rabbit. Oh, that one's, two people kissing, or I don't know, whatever we thought at the time. And so, where have those days gone? So we drove all the way out there, didn't see any of the wackadoodle clouds that we see now, didn't see the long trails that are they're swelling up. We didn't see, like, there's been times here in Sarnia, and anybody who lives here will back me up on this, that it looks like our whole sky is covered by a layer of cotton batting, right? And it's all billowy. It is the strange. I have some pictures I could actually share if I found them. We've all taken pictures of the sky. These are things we've never, ever, ever seen before. So ask yourself, what has changed? What's different? And there's something going on. And so if you get an opportunity, definitely check out that video. And if you want to, like I said, go to our In the Know page, like it, and then when we share different things, Sandy and I, my partner in crime on our radio show, it's Sunday night, 7 to 9. If whenever we share stuff, you can check it out. You know, our power is in our knowledge. We are not in a hopeless environment, but you need to educate yourself. We need to, just learn and maybe the high population cities is not the healthiest place to be, right? That's where so much stuff is going on. So just food for thought, just something to think about. And the other thing I want you to think about is obviously the good news. So let's start that now. And so, we live in a world, and I'm not saying this is in our country, but we live in a world where a lot of places are being proactive and they are taking charge and they're focusing on solutions. And that's what we need to do. And if we can't control our government. I mean, geez, that's a whole nother topic. But you can control your surroundings. You can control where you put your dollar. You can control what you put in your mouth. And you can control the air you breathe. Well, bleed, that's no good. So let's get to the news. This is awesome. So on that note, in a bid to banish air pollution generated by automobiles, German ministers have announced that they will be testing free public transport in 5 different cities. In a letter written to the environmental commissioner of the EU, German legislators wrote, "We are considering public transport free of charge in order to reduce the number of private cars. Effectively fighting air pollution without any further unnecessary delays is of the highest priority for Germany," they added, according to AFP. The initiative will be launching by the end of the year, at the latest, in cities such as Bonn, Essen, and Mannheim. Should the scheme prove successful, Germany will expand the initiative and start refining public infrastructure to support the increased transit capability and capacity. In addition to the free public transport, German legislators are planning on tightening emission restrictions for cabs and buses, implementing more tax breaks for low-emission vehicles, and encouraging carpool schemes. All of these tactics will hopefully help the nation achieve the environmental goals set by the Paris Agreement. That is absolutely awesome. Now, tied in with pollution is breathing, because breathing is very important. And I am the poster child of how important breathing is, because I struggle with chronic bronchitis all the time, and I'm always using alternative methods to try to control that. But I live in the most polluted city in Canada, so I think bigger steps need to be had in the future at some point. Anyways, in China, though, they are making it priority. Chinese researchers have regenerated human lung tissue in a patient using that patient's own stem cells. The first time that has been achieved worldwide, said Zuo Wei, lead researcher of the team from the School of Medicine in Tongji University in Shanghai. After obtaining dozens of stem cells by brushing a patient's lungs, researchers let the cells multiply into the tens of millions in a lab, then transplanted them into the damaged part of the patient's lungs. After 3 to 6 months, the stem cells formed new lung structures, repairing the damaged tissues, Zuo said. The research signifies that the revival of human organs has stepped out of the lab and into clinical application, says Zhang Jun, party chief of the school. A paper about their study was published in the Protein and Cell website, a Beijing-based international journal, on January 17th. Once lung tissues are damaged and develop fibrosis, which is excessive growth of connective tissue, The disease often continues and cannot be reversed. Traditional medicines only slow down the process of fibrosis, doctors said. However, stem cells have the ability to regenerate and repair tissue. In lab experiments, the lungs of mice with fibrosis in their organs became very healthy 3 weeks later, he said. Wow, 3 weeks. Wow, that's cool. More than 80 patients have been involved in the clinical experiments since April 2016, and all of them showed progress in indicators such as lung capacity and walking distance, Zuo said. The repair and substitution for the lesion tissues in lungs are clearly visible through CT scans, and they reported less coughing, sputum, and shortness of breath, Zuo said. Not all damaged tissue can be replaced by transplanted stem cells, he said, but improvement is visible for everyone to see. Such transplants are not suitable for all kinds of lung disease. It will mainly work for lung diseases caused by damaged tissues, such as bronchitis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and interstitial lung disease. Lung cancer is not included, Zuo said. Daya Exayation, a doctor from the respiration department of the first hospital affiliated to the Army Medical University in Chongqing, who was responsible for the clinical experiments and the research, said more patients will be recruited this year, and the patients will all undergo long-term observation. Research this year will also focus on whether such transplants will work for patients with other diseases, such as of the kidneys and the uterus, Zuo said. Well, isn't that absolutely awesome? That is great science right there. And it is so important, in this world that we live in, that we need to breathe. If there was ever a time that you didn't realize how important it was, now is the time, especially when we're so surrounded by so much pollution. And we can't see it, but it's there. We know about the things, especially here in Sarnia, Ontario, where I live. I used to work in a plant in the valley, and we had spills, and it was black little things that came out of the system, came out of our stack, and then they would drop, and we'd have to send them for car washes to scrub it all off the cars, and the car wash guys would be like, wow, we really have to scrub that stuff off. And it makes you think, what is going in your lungs, right? This is like little speckles we see on the cars. Imagine what we're breathing in. And then our last story today. Again, Europeans. It's interesting that we call ourselves a first world country, isn't it? Europeans are reportedly, this is a good one, enjoying legumes more and more and are increasingly looking for alternatives to meat, because we know that cow farts are a big pollutant, right? They're worse than the planes, they're worse than the automobile. So it's very good that people are switching over to legumes or beans, right? That's what it is. A new report carried out by researchers working in the Transition Paths to Sustainable Legume-Based Systems in Europe, which is also known as TRUE, found that products containing grain legumes, such as beans, lentils, or soybeans, have registered an increase in 39% in Europe. The growth wasn't uniform across the continent, with Western Europe contributing the most of the growth. The most active region was the United Kingdom, with a share of the 19% of total new legume inclusion product launches in Europe, followed by France at 14% and Germany at 13%. Joe Fiera, a student at Universidade of Portuguese, explained. Products that worked as meat alternatives were by far the most popular sector, boasting a growth of 451%. Researchers also reported an increase of 196% for vegan products and of 73% for gluten-free products. The product subcategories with the highest increment were meat substitutes with an amazing growth rate of 451%, pasta with an increase of 295%, and bean-based snacks growing by 128%, says Carla Teixeira, lead author of the report. It's not just the quality of products that hit the market, but also the diversity. Researchers quantified the exact 27,058 new legume products were placed on the markets worldwide. Ethical consumerism is becoming a growing concern for many consumers who want to improve their health while also reducing their environmental impact. As a result, the market is adapting, offering more and presumably tastier alternatives to meat. Consumer preference also shifted. Although green beans were still the legume most often processed, as of mid-2017, their overall share decreased by 23% compared to 2013. Meanwhile, chickpeas increased by 47% and lentils by 8%. These are encouraging trends. Legumes are more filling than meat, better for your waist and the planet. Consuming legumes is associated with a lower risk of diabetes and heart disease, while being cheaper and requiring far less energy and water than meat. Even without giving up meat, adding more legumes to your diet is one of the healthiest things you can do. In Europe, the consumption of animal products has slowly declined. Beef and pig consumption has also shifted to poultry, which is also a slight improvement, considering the significantly low environmental and health toll associated with poultry. So there you go. One of your powers is the food that you put in your mouth. And it's not just about you and your body. You know, those animals, look at the horrible, I'm calling it a life, but